Thank you, Rajiv, for the kind introduction. It's been an honor and a pleasure for me to have been the president of SGS this past year. And although this meeting has been both delayed and then converted to a virtual meeting, I'd like to express my gratitude to everyone who has contributed to this year's meeting. And I think this meeting also demonstrates our resourcefulness and resilience that we have as physicians and as a society. You know, a year ago when Pat Culligan and I began thinking about this year's annual meeting, we had the idea of using the year 2020 as a theme of the program, 2020 Vision, embracing innovation that builds on past success. In other words, how we learn from past experiences in order to see more clearly into the future. Well, that was a year ago, and a lot has changed in that year. I don't think anyone could have imagined just 6 months ago what we were about to go through as a country in 2020. An unprecedented, devastating healthcare crisis that has claimed more than 130,000 American lives. Massive unemployment that rivals the levels seen during the Great Depression of the 1930s. A dysfunctional administration in Washington that has all but ignored science and health experts. And racial injustice that has led to nationwide protests and has put the spotlight on rampant racism, racial inequality, and police brutality. All this tragedy, unrest, and uncertainty has affected each of us, collectively as physicians, but also individually in many different ways. It has affected our lives, our livelihood, our patients, and our sense of civility, compassion, and humanity. I'm not here to give a political speech, but all these events have had a profound impact on all of us and our ability to practice our profession and care for women. You know, over the past several months, most of us were unable to see patients in the office or to perform what has been labeled elective surgery, although that has included essential surgery, such as staging operations for GYN cancer and treating conditions such as adnexal masses, menorrhagia, and pelvic pain. And it was certainly understandable why this happened in many areas of the country when resources, including hospital staff, ICU beds, ventilators, and personal protective equipment, needed to be allocated to massive numbers of patients being treated for COVID-19. I don't know if you saw this, but nurses at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City had to improvise and make protective gowns out of hefty garbage bags. And just last month, FEMA was sending rain ponchos to nursing homes instead of actual gowns or other PPE. Notice there's no opening for the hands. How absurd is that? But the fact of the matter is that some groups and some states have tried to take advantage of the pandemic and politicize our professional efforts. For example, Governor Greg Abbott of Texas, as well as governors in several other states, called for the cessation of both medical and surgical abortion during the pandemic, classifying these procedures as elective or non-essential. Now, regardless of where you personally stand on the abortion issue, the argument for restricting abortion access during this healthcare crisis simply didn't make sense. The justification was that we needed to preserve PPE and hospital staff for COVID-19 patients. But women who are unable to obtain an abortion will either remain pregnant and require prenatal care and then support during their delivery, which requires PPE and hospital staff, or they may try to end their pregnancies by using dangerous methods to induce an abortion, which would lead to more women requiring medical services, utilizing clinicians, hospital staff, and PPE. There are no words to describe what our country has been through and what we continue to go through at this time. Words that come to mind are, surreal, overwhelming, unprecedented, unthinkable, but most of all, just tragic. The COVID-19 pandemic will forever be known as the disaster not just of the decade, but of our lifetime. Every day, watching the confirmed cases, hospitalizations, and deaths has been incomprehensible. Each of those numbers are individuals with lives, with family, friends, neighbors. There isn't one person listening to me right now who has not been personally affected by the pandemic. We all know people who have been tested positive and have been quarantined or hospitalized. Many of us know someone who has lost their battle with this horrific disease. And we're not done with the virus. The experts tell us it will most likely come back in waves, both here in the U.S. and around the world, until there is either an effective medical treatment or enough people get the infection that we develop the so-called herd immunity. Or a vaccine can be developed, which may take more than a year to come out and test adequately, and frankly, it's not even a given there will ever be an effective and safe vaccine. Listen, the fastest vaccine ever approved was for the mumps, and that took 4 years to develop back in the 1960s. The current pandemic has been compared to the Spanish flu of 1918, which was the worst flu pandemic in recorded history. The Spanish flu didn't originate in Spain, but it was called the Spanish flu because it occurred during World War I, and nations involved in the war didn't accurately report their flu outbreaks. Spain, on the other hand, remained neutral during the war, and its press freely reported cases, including when the Spanish king, Alfonso VIII, contracted it in the spring of 1918, and this led to the misperception that it originated in Spain. Actually, it's not even known where the 1918 flu began, although the first reported cases were at a U.S. Army camp in Kansas in March of that year. The first wave of the 1918 pandemic happened in the spring and was generally mild. Most people developed the typical flu symptoms of chills and fever, fatigue, and they recovered after a few days. The number of reported deaths was actually low. It was the second wave that occurred in the fall and was highly contagious and very lethal. Victims died within hours or days of developing symptoms. Now, one difference between the Spanish flu and the current pandemic is that the Spanish flu killed many young people in their 20s and 30s. In fact, more U.S. soldiers died from the 1918 flu than were killed in battle during the war. By the end of 1919, the flu had infected up to a third of the world's population. That's 500 million infected, and killed an estimated 50 million people. In the U.S. alone, 675,000 people died. Now, back in 1918, there was no vaccine. There were no antibiotics to treat secondary bacterial infections, so control efforts worldwide were limited to non-pharmacologic interventions such as isolation, quarantine, good personal hygiene, the use of disinfectants, and limitations of public gatherings. Sound familiar? There are so many parallels between the current pandemic and the Spanish flu, and there is so much we can learn from what happened back then. This graph shows the temporal relationship between how quickly social distancing rules were put into place and the effect this had on the number of cases experienced in cities. In Philadelphia, which is in green, the first cases of the more deadly second wave were reported on September 14th, but officials there decided to go ahead with a parade that was scheduled on September 28th. Now, they saw a spike of cases and closed schools and churches and banned public gatherings the first week of October, less than 3 weeks after those initial cases were reported. They had a huge spike of deaths within the next 2 weeks. Now, St. Louis, on the other hand, shut down the city within 3 to 4 days after the first reported cases. And you can see how they avoided such high death rates by acting so quickly. Wearing masks or face coverings became commonplace during the pandemic. Even Major League Baseball was affected, with players and umpires wearing masks during games. In mid-May of 1918, Babe Ruth, who was playing for the Boston Red Sox at the time, went on a day trip with his wife to Revere Beach. It's just a little north of Boston. That evening, he developed body aches and a fever of 104. So the Red Sox physician painted his throat with a solution of silver nitrate, which was thought at the time to treat the infection, but caused a severe reaction that left Ruth writhing in pain and nearly killed him. But he was admitted to Mass General Hospital. Now, he recovered and helped the Red Sox win the World Series in 1918. He actually came down with the flu again during the second wave of the virus in the fall of 1918. Interestingly, one of the only pharmacological treatments for the Spanish flu was aspirin. At the time, medical professionals were recommending up to 30 grams of aspirin a day, which we now know is toxic. Doses above 4 grams are unsafe. Aspirin poisoning can lead to pulmonary edema, so medical historians believe that many deaths were caused or accelerated by aspirin poisoning. Now, there were a number of factors besides the properties of the virus itself that contributed to the virulence of the 1918 pandemic. Movement and mobilization of troops during World War I placed large number of people in close contact, and living spaces were overcrowded. About a third of all the physicians in the U.S. were deployed to military service, which left medical students to take care of influenza patients back home. There were no diagnostic tests that existed at the time to treat for the virus. There was no critical care support. There was no mechanical ventilation. So how has the world changed since 1918? In 1918, the world population was 1.8 billion. Today, it's grown to 7.6 billion. Now, as human populations have risen, so have animal populations to feed them. This means that there are a greater number of hosts that provide increased opportunities for novel influenza viruses from birds and pigs to spread, evolve, and infect people. The wet markets that are still popular in China and other countries are felt to be an important source of influenza viruses and other infectious disease agents for humans. Today, we also have global movement of people and goods, which allows the latest disease threat to be just an international plane flight away. It certainly doesn't help that our president held an indoor campaign rally in Tulsa where people were not socially distancing and hardly anyone in the crowd was seen wearing a mask, including Trump. Listen, this is not the presidential address I was intending to give, but the theme of this talk is about gratitude, resourcefulness, and resilience. And these concepts have never been more important than they are today. What am I grateful for? Well, there are so many things for us all to be grateful for. We are all grateful for the frontline workers, both in the healthcare system as well as those whose jobs are considered essential to continued critical infrastructure viability, such as those in the food and agricultural industry, telecommunications, energy, transportation, water, law enforcement, and public works. While most Americans were asked to stay at home for literally months, essential workers were told to go do their jobs, and often putting their own health as well as the health of their families at risk. Healthcare workers specifically represent 20% of all frontline workers. These include healthcare practitioners, physicians, registered nurses, pharmacists, who make up basically 3/4 of all healthcare workers, as well as health support workers, nursing assistants, home health aides, nursing home workers, technicians, and hospital janitors, who make up 1/4 of all healthcare workers. These frontline workers have been especially vulnerable since they are knowingly working with or alongside patients infected with coronavirus, a highly transmissible and potentially deadly virus. In an article in Kaiser Health News last month, just in June 6, nearly 600 U.S. healthcare workers had died of COVID-19. Now, I know many of our SGS members, as well as our subspecialty fellows, have been reassigned during the pandemic to serve on the front line in ERs, ICUs, on labor and delivery, in COVID-19 screening centers, and we are all extremely grateful for your selfless commitment, your courage, and hard work. Now, SGS itself has been very busy during the pandemic, and I'd like to highlight a few activities that we've been involved in over the past several months. We supported a number of joint statements that pertain to gynecologic surgery. One pertained to safety issues when performing minimally invasive surgery during the COVID-19 pandemic. Another provided guidance for returning to hospital and office-based procedures during the pandemic. We signed on to several amicus briefs, which are legal documents dealing with groups that tried to prohibit women from elective abortion during the pandemic, which could have significant health consequences for women. The prolific SGS Systematic Review Group, or SRG, along with the Collaborative Research in Pelvic Surgery Consortium, CORS, published a comprehensive guide for urogynecologic patient care utilizing telemedicine during the pandemic. SGS was also instrumental in establishing the FPMRS Fellows webinar series in collaboration with OGS and SUFU. The idea was to fill the educational gap of our FPMRS Fellows due to a lack of surgery and clinic volume during the pandemic. We had a total of 17 national webinars from April until mid-June, featuring many of our members, including John Delancey, Holly Richter, Charlie Reardon, Catherine Matthews, Pat Culligan, John Gephardt, Kio Nahira, Cecile Ferrando, and Abbas Shoberi. These webinars are archived and available to our members through the SGS website. I'd like to thank all the members who volunteered their time as either speakers or panelists to help educate our FPMRS Fellows. It's been an honor for me to have served as the president of SGS this past year and to have been on the board of directors for the past 4 years. I've had the pleasure to work closely with a great group of people on the board, and I'd like to thank them all for their hard work and commitment to the society. There are many other people who have dedicated a great deal of their time, energy, and creativity to this society, and I can't mention all of our members who have volunteered their time, but I would like to highlight a few of the committees and their accomplishment over the past year. It's been an honor and a pleasure for me to have worked with my friend and colleague, Pat Culligan, who has done an incredible job as the scientific program chair this year. Pat is a wonderful friend, a talented and creative surgeon with an innovative mind. The program committee worked very hard to put together a great educational event. Although it was disappointing for everyone involved when we made the final decision to make the annual meeting this virtual one, Pat embraced the challenge and the opportunity to make this a great meeting. Mike Moen and the video reviewers watched 90 videos that were submitted to this year's meeting, which was a record for SGS. And they selected the top 15 videos that you have been watching during the scientific program, as well as 15 additional videos that will be shown in the Video Fest this afternoon. Peter Jepson chaired the Abstract Review Committee, and they reviewed 242 abstracts for this meeting. Reviewing abstracts and videos is a tremendous amount of work and resulted in the high-quality program that you are watching. In addition to the videos that were reviewed for the annual meeting, the Education Committee, under the leadership of Mike, upgraded the SGS video library from past presentations at annual meetings from as far back as 2005 to the present meeting. The library is now searchable by author, institution, title, or keyword, and is available to SGS members, and we've also actually made it available to residency and fellowship program directors. As you know, these are high-quality videos that are great learning opportunities for the viewer. They also created a simulation task force and led a PG course at the annual meeting in 2018. The committee also worked with OB Stats to publish a patient educational video on hysterectomy. That video is now available to all members from a link on the SGS website. The committee also provides monthly videos to OBG management. Next, the membership committee, led by Nicole Donnellan, reviews all membership applications and determines whether or not all criteria are met to proceed to the next level of review. They also respond to applicants with suggestions if the applicant needs additional information. They reach out to associate members to encourage them to move forward with identifying a proposer to apply to become an active member. And at the annual meeting, they staff the SGS booth and they manage the membership mingle and the seniors engaging young learners at the annual scientific meeting. The research committee has been really busy under the leadership of Kate Merriweather. The systematic review group is currently working on 2 projects. There are 5 manuscripts that are currently undergoing the submission and review process, and they have published 32 papers since the inception of the SRG in 2007. The Fellows Pelvic Research Network, or FPRN, has also been extremely busy with 12 active projects between the AUGS SGS and the FMIGS SGS subgroups. The research committee also established CORES, which is a research network of attending physicians that facilitates collaborative multi-center research projects. The postgraduate course committee, led by Roseanne Coe, plans and implements the annual winter PG course, which took place this year in La Jolla, California, and was very successful. It's a 3.5-day course with 2 days of didactics and an optional hands-on lab, and a great group of people to work with. Kara King will be taking the lead in putting together the next winter PG course. Now, speaking of Kara, she also hosted an informative and entertaining SGS podcast series called Gynecologic Surgeons Unscrubbed that covered a range of interesting topics, and I encourage all of you to check the podcast out. Thank you, Kara, for your hard work on this creative project. The Fund Development Committee, under the current direction of Mark Toglia, has created 5 named funds over the past 6 years. The Michael Aronson Fund was established in 2014 to support young faculty members who wish to attend the SGS Winter PG course. The Donald Gallup Fund was established in 2015 to support the Distinguished Surgeon Award. The John Delancey Fund was established in 2016 to support the Pelvic Anatomy Group, the PAG. The David Nichols Fund was established in 2018 to support the SGS Vaginal Surgery Award. The CORES Fund was established in 2019 in honor of Drs. Iglesia, Kenton, and Richter to support the new CORE group, which is now under the guidance of SGS. We also have our first named lectureship, which was established to honor our colleague Mark Walters, and the fundraising was spearheaded by Amy Park. Dr. Walters will be presenting the inaugural lecture at next year's annual meeting. Now, I'd also like to recognize SGS members who have volunteered to represent our society with other organizations. I do want to express all my gratitude to our Executive Director, Nancy Frankel, and our Director of Finance, Lenny Siegel, who have been an invaluable part of our society for many years. While SGS members may spend a few years on committees or on the board of directors, Nancy and Lenny have been the guiding light for the society since 2012. They are the glue that holds the society together and the reason why the society has grown not only financially, but also in terms of the diversity of our subspecialty representation, and frankly, grown in terms of our visibility and prestige as one of the leading gynecologic organizations in the United States. I want to thank them for their leadership, dedication, wisdom, and guidance. Outside of SGS, I do want to express my gratitude to people with whom I have worked over the past 25 years. I have so many people to thank who have inspired, advised, and trained me over my professional career. I owe so much to Steve Young, a former president of this society, who introduced me to the field of urogynecology during my residency at UMass Medical Center. Steve is a talented vaginal surgeon and recently retired and now living in Woodstock, New York. I am also indebted to Deb Myers and the late Neil Jackson, who took me on as their very first fellow at Brown University in 1993 and taught me so much about the field of pelvic reconstructive surgery. It was also at Brown that I worked closely with the late Roger Furland, a very talented and innovative laparoscopic surgeon, and together we learned to perform laparoscopic reconstructive surgery at a time when it was only being done in a very few centers throughout the country. I came to Mount Auburn Hospital, a community teaching hospital of Harvard Medical School in Cambridge, Massachusetts in 1995 when I completed my fellowship. I've been there my entire career, which is 25 years. I was recruited by Tony DeSciullo, the director of gynecology, who has become one of my closest and dearest friends. Tony is not only the most talented minimally invasive surgeon with whom I have had the pleasure to work, but he also has incredible judgment and patience when teaching medical students, residents, and fellows. Tony is incredibly modest and unpretentious with an amazing self-deprecating sense of humor. And all of these qualities are the reason why he is so respected and revered in the Boston area. As you know, mentorship has always been an important part of the mission of SGS, and we promote the idea of mentorship throughout the annual meeting. I mention this only because I feel extremely fortunate to have been mentored by incredible surgeons like Tony DeSciullo, as well as so many colleagues throughout the country with whom I have had the pleasure to work and collaborate. We started our FPMRS fellowship back in 1999, and that fellowship is going strong under the leadership of one of my other partners, Iman El-Kadri. We've graduated 16 fellows, and each of them have moved on to have successful careers, either academic or private practice. Some have held leadership positions in national organizations, and even one who has gone on to become president of AUGS, Charlie Reardon. I am so proud of each of our fellows, past and current. Thank you for your hard work, your dedication, and especially for your passion for excellence in gynecologic surgery. Finally, I owe so much to my family, to my wife, Marcia, and to our two amazing kids, Ben and Isabel. My family means everything to me, and they are the foundation of who I have become in life. Everyone listening today knows that we could not do what we do without the love and support of our family and friends. I'd like to end by recognizing the importance of SGS, not only to our members and guests, but also to our patients and to the community. SGS is an organization whose mission is to promote excellence in gynecologic surgery through meetings like this, whether in person or virtually, by sharing our experiences, our research, our techniques, and our opinions. The Society is built on a foundation of collaboration and mentorship. Now, more than ever, it is critical for us to stay connected as a society. Once again, I'd like to thank all of our members who have volunteered their time to serve on committees. I'd like to encourage other members to look for opportunities to get more involved with our society. I think you'll find it extremely rewarding. Now, while it's certainly disappointing for us that we are not together for the annual meeting, these are not normal times, but we are resilient, and we have learned to adapt to a new way of life, a new normal that permeates every aspect of our lives, and not only affects the way we practice medicine and the way we do surgery, but how we travel, how we shop for food, how we spend our free time. This is our new normal for the foreseeable future. Whether it's by a Zoom fellowship reunions, or Zoom birthday celebrations, or FaceTime, texting, Facebook Messenger, even picking up the phone and making a phone call. There are so many ways to stay connected with your colleagues, to ask for advice, to share some news, or bounce a clinical problem off a colleague. Though we need to social distance, there is no reason to feel professionally isolated at this time. We are resilient and resourceful. And though it may be hard at this point to have a clear 2020 vision of the future, we will get through this, whatever it takes, and we will continue caring for our patients and improving their lives through education, discussion, research, and innovation. Once again, it has been a true pleasure serving as the president of the Society for the past year. And I look forward to seeing everyone in person next year in Palm Springs. Thank you.